Welcome back to the Seedy AF podcast. I'm Jocelyn.
And I'm the Omega. We're happy to have you join us for another episode where we answer your burning questions about the adult game industry. Now let's get seedy.
In our last episode, we talked about how we got into the adult game industry. We have since received some questions that would have been perfect for that episode, but the episode was already recorded before we got to the questions. So we wanted to answer those real quick before we dive into today's juicy topic.
An aspiring adult game developer asked us on Reddit, between the two of us, who was the first to get into the adult visual novels, or AVNs, and whose idea was it to get into developing them? And the answer to that is, it was me. Originally, in 2017, I ended up finding a game called Dreams of Desire. I just stumbled upon it. I don't honestly remember how. I saw it and I was like, wow, this is really cool. And then immediately I was like, in my mind, because I like to think about new business ideas and such, I was like, oh, maybe I should try this. And then that quickly turned into, I want to try this. And then I found a game called Summertime Saga, and then we started Prince Suburbia, and that's all she wrote.
Yeah, I think the first one that you showed me was Summertime Saga. I don't think you showed me Dreams of Desire first. So the first one I saw was Summertime Saga. Nick from our Patreon asked, what professional backgrounds did you have before getting into this? I think I briefly mentioned in the episode about how we got into this that I had dabbled in romance writing and self-publishing. That was kind of a side hustle that I started back in maybe 2012, 2013. But the main career that I had before doing this was in education.
And for me, originally I started out in the military, and then I kind of moved into like a web developer space, and that ultimately ended up as a front-end developer. So I had some experience programming, and that has, as you would imagine, helped us develop our games with some more of the complex features and, source control like GitHub, Git, all that kind of stuff. We really appreciate you guys giving us those questions. And with that out of the way, we want to get into the real juicy topic for today. And we got this question from both a member of our team and a fellow dev that was on the NSFW dev subreddit. And the question is, does working on sex-related content full-time have any effect on your sex lives?
So my answer is kind of boring and probably not what players want to hear. But for me, the answer is no. There's a very clear separation in my mind between work and my sexuality. Just like if I were working in any other job, the fact that my work happens to involve sex doesn't really impact my own personal sex life. Although I cannot speak for other devs. I think that I'm not like a lot of the average dev, since I'm not the main audience for the games that we make. Not that I don't enjoy them, but I'm not the intended audience and I'm not creating it for myself. So I think that might be why for me, there's maybe more of a separation than for other developers. Just a quick anecdote that I was talking to some friends that know what we do and just talking about, I don't even remember what I was talking about the games. And one of my friends just remarked out of the blue, oh, your sex life must be so great because we work on these games together and they're about sex. And, that was the conclusion that they drew. But I think my answer was that the developing games together hasn't really changed our sex life. If anything, I think the fact that we have strong communication is what matters more than the nature of what we work on or that we work together.
Yeah. And to go with this for me, what I'll say is like, this doesn't make us any extra kinky or make us do things or want to try things that we haven't done before. Like we would have done that without these games regardless. But for me specifically and personally, like for these games, it's a whole different thing. Creating the games, developing them yourself versus experiencing them for the first time as a player. That being said, there are some times where like Jocelyn will have a really well-written scene that I haven't seen before. I'll read it and it'll be some of the characters that I enjoy. And then I'll be like, okay. And that'll get me in the mood. And then, sometimes I'll just walk into Jocelyn's office and then I'll put on my robe and wizard hat and that's all she wrote.
You're funny. I think that's probably another reason why for me there's more of a separation is because I both write the scenes and do most of the art, at least for A Shot in the Dark. And then for Prince Suburbia, I do most of the writing as well. So nothing is ever a surprise for me. If the only person that really ever gets to be surprised is the Omega. Along those same lines, we got multiple questions about how we chose the kinks in our games or how we choose the kinks in our games when we're planning new ones. And whether or not we included any of our own kinks in the games. And if we did we know that the other person had those kinks before we started making games together?
This answer is pretty easy for me. And some of you that are already on our team or fans probably already know that, yeah, some of the kinks and fetishes you see in the games do align with my own. Specifically, since we started with Princess of Suburbia, the big boobas, the lactation, the incest kink, yeah, those are definitely my kinks and what I'm into. And then I'm also pretty confident that, yeah, Jocelyn knew about my kinks before we actually started these games. And then, some other things I'll say, like for the incest kink, I feel like it's become more mainstream as the years have gone on in the adult porn space and the adult game space. And some of that's evident with Game of Thrones, a website called Literotica, and some of the other main porn sites. Like, I'm sure a lot of people have seen all the step cess that's come on there. Like, oh no, step bro, help me, I'm stuck. It's really a no-brainer to also include this because it doesn't change any wardrobe. It doesn't affect like what you really put into the game other than dialogue, whether that's a porn video or a video game, visual novel, whatever. And then the last thing I'll say to the kink that I just want to get in there real quick. For Game of Thrones, this is a spoiler, so anybody who doesn't want to listen to it, tune out right here. But John, buddy, you didn't have to fall on a sword, man. All you had to do to save so many lives was to just lay down with your aunt, and that's all she wanted. Would it have really been so bad?
Yeah, I know you're still salty about that. So for myself, I can't think of any. Yeah, I can't think of any kink that I learned about that surprised me. I don't know that I knew about them specifically, but I don't remember being surprised or shocked. But I'm also not very easily shocked. And I can't speak for other devs. This is personal to me. I think players assume more about devs' sexual preferences than is actually true. I think that our games are an example, even though for the Omega, he said that, some of the kinks that he originally put into Prince Suburbia do align with his own. We've obviously gone on to add a lot more that do not align with our own. And, that's definitely not the only place that we draw inspiration from. And I would assume that maybe a lot of people think because I make these games and the kind of content that I put into them that maybe I'm bisexual or I'm into femdom. And it just so happens that I'm not. I don't really have to be into the specific things that I'm writing in order to enjoy writing them and, enjoy writing them for other people to enjoy. And honestly, trying to think about how to answer this question, it would be hard for me to say that I have any specific kinks. And when I thought about it, I thought it's kind of like how I am with a lot of things. I'm pretty easygoing. And like with food, for example, it would be easier for me to list the things that I don't like than the things that I do. And I think that pretty much applies to everything for me, and including sex and including kinks. Like I'm pretty much like a try anything. If everybody's enjoying themselves, I'm enjoying myself. I don't have a lot of I'm not picky. I don't have a lot of specific interests. I do though understand why a lot of kinks are popular, and especially the ones that we put in our games. I particularly understand, why things that are taboo are common kinks. And in the romance and erotica market, which is where I, started with this, there is a lot of taboo content, including, some incest or stepcest content. But I think in the romance and erotica genre for the female audience, a lot of the taboo kinks are more around consensual non-consent, CNC, or non-consent, non-con, or dubious consent, dub-con. And, a lot of that is called dark romance. And I really enjoyed that genre, even though that's not something that I would call like a personal kink in my personal life, but I just enjoy reading it because it is something different and it's interesting. And I think that for me is, again, helps me write for kinks that aren't my own kinks, in that I understand that when something is taboo, that makes it more arousing for a lot of people. And then also I understand that you can enjoy things in a fictional sense or a fantasy sense, and that doesn't mean that you have any interest in doing it in real life. And that doesn't necessarily translate to your real life sex life. And so I think just having that general understanding, allows me to write for a large number of kinks.
So just a couple of side tangents real quick. I do remember you talking about these books that you found and were reading. Their erotica/romance novels of a pretty popular author in the space. And one of her main stories were about these blue aliens or blue monster guys that were with, I think they were these human women. And for me, it was just really cool to hear that, women can be kinky and into the monster stuff just like the guys are. It's just in a different space right now. And then there was another book that you brought up that piqued my interest the other day that was about these two lesbian lovers. And one of them, at least, was like this girl with multiple tentacles. And I remember you talking about how somewhere in the book description or something like that, that it was like multiple penetration or like 3-hole penetration. And I was like, damn, they are not holding back. That is crazy.
Yeah, I think that would probably surprise a lot of men to learn, and maybe women if they're not reading romance novels, is that, especially in the past decade, that they've gotten, just as kinky, or the word they use in that industry is spicy, as a lot of the content that is made for a male audience. And I think a lot of people still have an image in their mind of the old-fashioned bodice ripper romance novel with Fabio on the cover and his long hair, and he's big and muscly and, his shirt off. And the reality is that the industry has really evolved since then. And, this would probably be a topic that we could get into for a whole episode, which is that something I've learned is that for the most part, men and women really want the same thing when it comes to the types of adult content that they consume in a really core sense. The details are different, but as far as creating content for a male audience or for a female audience, I really draw on a lot of the same things no matter what I'm doing.
And this kind of leads into one of the last questions we want to answer this episode, which is, it's around, we had both a team member and a patron ask, how do you choose which kinks will appear in your games? Is it your own preference? Is it player preference? How do you balance those?
So I think, as I said before, there's a lot of things that I'm comfortable with developing. So I wouldn't say that personal preference plays a huge role. I also do not try to appeal to my own personal preferences when I choose the content that goes into our games. I really try to think about what is our target audience for the game, since both of our games are slightly different and have a slightly different target audience, but with some overlap. I try to think about what is the target audience and what is the average player of that audience and what will they enjoy. And then I try to create something that I think that average player will enjoy, which is not to say that I try to please everybody. I don't think that you can please everyone, but we do like the idea that we reach a large audience with our games. The only part that I would call personal preference is that I do like doing things that I haven't seen done much before, just because it's fun to explore something that's novel. And I love the idea of our players getting to experience something that maybe they've never experienced before. A good example of this is in Chapter 3 of A Shot in the Dark, which we just released. We did an erotic hypnosis scene, and we happen to have a writer on our team who works in the psychology field. So she was able to help us make that scene really authentic. And I decided to do a scene like that because I thought it would be fun and interesting and something new. And it never occurred to me that that might be somebody's kink or fetish, but of course it is. And as soon as we released the chapter, we immediately got a few comments from different players about how that is their kink or fetish. And they were so excited to see it in a game. And I think that's something too that we find really fun, is when players find something in our games that they enjoy that maybe we didn't realize they would, or when players tell us that they find something in our games that they enjoy that they didn't know was a kink or fetish that they had, but now they know and now they want more of that content. And I think that speaks to how we make our games really accessible to a wide audience. Even though we certainly do not go out of our way to try to make everyone happy, we do try to make games that we think a lot of different people can enjoy.
And along those lines, real quick too, like with the femdom stuff and A Shot in the Dark, for something that's a little more involved like that, we do try our best to make it so it's not offensive and give the player an out if they're not actually into the scene, which I think is pretty cool. And we've had players comment on it and fans saying that they appreciate that they're given that opportunity to not only just experience the kink, but also, like, if they don't want to pursue that path any further, that they can just exit at that moment.
Something else I wanted to say about the femdom content that we included in our games. First of all, we specifically sought out a writer who writes erotica and who does role play and is a dom, D-O-M-M-E. She is a dom in the femdom space. And so that was really fun for us to have like an expert who could really make the scenes really authentic. And I think that's a comment that we've gotten as well from players that are already into BDSM, is that they appreciate that the scenes are very authentic. They portray a lot of compassion and care between the two characters and a lot of, really explicit consent. They establish a safe word, they establish honorifics. And those are things that you certainly do see in other games, but not all the time. And I think for players that have a specific BDSM fetish, that they appreciate seeing those little details that shows that this is authentic. I think also too, something that I talked about with the writer when we were creating those scenes is that we wanted them to be, an entry point or something that was accessible to players that maybe had never tried femdom or had never tried BDSM before. And we've definitely gotten comments from players that maybe they were a little bit nervous about the scene, but they gave it a shot, or, it piqued their interest and they were willing to give it a try and they really enjoyed it more than they thought they would. And maybe even piqued their interest a little bit in BDSM or femdom beyond what they thought their interest initially was.
But yeah, as Jocelyn was saying, I'm also very comfortable with including a lot of kinks in the games, even if I'm not into them. And then the other thing I'll say is like Prince of Suburbia was definitely more niche than initially that we would have actually liked it, but it was also sort of a passion project to begin with from my perspective. And that's kind of why it's more focused on like the kinks that I specifically enjoy instead of, including a lot more mainstream options for people out there too. And really, I think our goal going forward, like with the Shot in the Dark and future games too, is to offer the opportunity for more flavors, for more players, and to try to, appeal and give people what they want to see and just those options out there.
One last thing, we want to make sure we give a big shout out to the two writers that we mentioned in this episode. Mute Hazelnut is our writer that has experience in psychology and helped with that erotic hypnosis scene in A Shot in the Dark. And Kitty Kaplan is our femdom writer that helped with all the Paloma scenes in A Shot in the Dark. So thank you so much to both those writers who are helping players explore kinks that they already knew about and kinks that they didn't know about.
Yeah, you're both fucking awesome.
Yes, agreed. Well, that was a really big topic to cover in one episode. We knew this topic would be one of our early ones because we know this topic is on many people's minds. We know that people are probably thinking in their minds, what is their sex life like? What are their kinks? Are they the same kinks as the ones in the game? How do they decide what kinks to put in their game? We know that people are thinking this, but probably most people are not brave enough to actually ask. So hopefully our answers satiated your curiosity. We really appreciate all the engagement we've gotten with this podcast and the first few episodes that we released. It really makes us happy to see that our community feels comfortable asking us so many questions, especially personal questions like these.
So all that being said, if there was anything about this topic or the questions that you feel like we didn't answer thoroughly or you wanted to know more about, then please reach out to us through email, Patreon, Twitter, Instagram, or any of the other platforms we're on, and I promise we'll do our best to get back to you. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Seedy AF podcast. We hope we planted some seeds with you. See you next time.
Bye.